Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Moving Screen. Happy New Year. This is Brendan Quinn from The Athletic. I'm here with Dylan Burkhart of umhoops.com. We are ready for some Big Ten play, I think, to say the least. Dylan, how are you feeling about finally being over the last 3 weeks of December?
I am relieved. It's been brutal just watching. You got games once a week, just terrible teams. It's just been a rough couple of weeks, and now we're going to get into the good stuff with Big Ten play starting on Wednesday.
Ideally, yes. So this is me complaining, because how else would you want to start the new year? But the last few games that at least I personally sat through have been Binghamton, Northern Illinois, Air Force, Oakland, Green Bay, Western Michigan, and that's it. That's been my last 2 weeks. So I'm firmly ready for some Big Ten basketball, and I'm sure all of you are out there. Thanks for joining us again. And before we get into talking about Michigan State, and making some bold Big Ten predictions for the second half of the year, we encourage you to subscribe to the pod. Tell your friends who are like-minded weirdos who focus on this stuff and not the bowl games. And make sure to leave a rating if you can. That helps us out, apparently. So, with that said, we're going to start with Michigan this week, Dylan. Obviously still undefeated, ranked number 2 in the country. I don't think anyone predicted any of this. I don't know if it's just because we're like in it, but when I continue to see Michigan ranked number 2 in the country and all this, like, do you think they are, before we get into what you wrote and whatever you want to talk about, but do you think they are as big of a national story as a team normally would be of this stature? When I say stature, I mean it's Michigan. It's a huge brand. It just doesn't seem like it's a huge buzzy story in college basketball. Am I misreading that?
I don't know that there's much of any college basketball buzz at this time of the year. I think Michigan was a huge story around Thanksgiving when they were playing games that mattered. I think that playing 4 games in a row that are kind of nestled away on Big Ten Network that no one really cares about, you kind of fall out of the picture. Add to that, Michigan hasn't really been playing nearly as well as they were in November. And I think that it doesn't feel like a big story, but all of a sudden, I think as you get to a Indiana game on CBS on Sunday afternoon, it starts to be a big story again. So I think that's a big element of, I guess, why it's sort of under the radar.
Yeah. And that's a huge game. It should be quite an atmosphere. The game is sold out. They are out of media credentials for it, as Dylan knows. It's something else when Indiana comes up here, because they bring a media contingent unlike any other school in the conference. Obviously, it's a 4-hour drive, and they love their hoops, so it's going to be quite a scene, I'm assuming, this weekend. But, it will take, for a team that's ranked number 2 and undefeated, it'll take a bit of a turnaround for Michigan to take care of business this weekend. Indiana's pretty good, and Michigan's just been flat. I called it a December malaise on Twitter. It was just bad games, bad competition, a week between games, no rhythm, no anything. How much do you read into Michigan's recent play?
So I pulled some numbers from Bart Torvik's site, and up through the Purdue game, Michigan was ranked for between all teams in that stretch. They were the best team in the country. In the 5 games since then, they're ranked in the mid-40s. That's it. So they've basically been playing like a top 50 team for the last month after playing like the best team in the country. I know that the competition level, they might play down to teams. I don't really buy into this whole thing about how hard it is to play once every week. Okay. Last year, it feels like we were talking about how hard it was to play 3 times a week. I mean, whatever. They're playing basketball. I don't think that's necessarily it. I just think for whatever reason, this team hasn't been sharp, and I don't really know if they're going to be able to just flip the switch and start playing like they were around Thanksgiving when North Carolina came to town. Is that a switch that they can flip? I guess we'll find out pretty quick here.
I agree with you on that. It's not, there isn't something where someone walks in the locker room and can just be like, oh, all right, are you guys ready to kind of go back and play the way we were a month ago? Like, it's not like that. There's no special sauce where you just kind of suddenly return to a level of play. I mean, they were so good in that stretch early on. Do you think it boils down to going back to what got them there? And I think what got them there was that refusal to allow anything on defense, and then everything stemmed from that. I don't think they're playing with the same intensity on defense. And, first of all, it's really hard to do that for 40 games over the course of a year. And, yeah, you're going to drop down. So, they're not a team that just goes and outscores people, right? When you see these blowout games in the bye situations between elite teams and these low majors, usually it's just teams that can go out and run, jump, and dunk on you. That's what Michigan State does pretty much every single game in these situations. I don't care who they're playing. No one can hang with them. Michigan isn't that way. When they play at their best, when it is, valuing possessions and playing just this intense level of defense every single possession. I think that's kind of that's the pivot point that brings them back to what they were.
Yeah, they're definitely not just to roll the ball out and let's go play and we're going to score 100 points and give up 70 and then that's the game. They also it's not just that though. They're playing, I would say, poorly, in a lot of ways where I think that there's an expectation, like the South Carolina game. If that game was in, compare that to the game against Providence. Two average teams. Michigan went out looking to kill Providence. They went out looking like we're going to beat South Carolina and we don't need to play with that sort of chip on your shoulder, whatever you want to call it. And they don't really have the talent to just walk out. They have a talented team. Don't take that the wrong way, but they don't have the talent to just, like you say, walk all over someone and show up and they win the game.
Totally agree.
What made their defense so good was that level of preparedness, that level of discipline, communication, and it hasn't really been there. I also don't know if you can play like that for 40 games either. So you wonder, did they peak in November, or is there another peak that?
Yeah, I don't buy it. I don't buy that they peaked. Certainly, I'm not on board with that. I would definitely say that coming off of the North Carolina Purdue week, right? I believe that was a Wednesday, Saturday, where they just waxed both of them. I think they came out of that with a little bit of our shit don't stink, and we can just kind of play with anybody in the country, and we are this and we are that. And like you said, I just don't think they're quite that good. They're not, they're not the 13 team, right? That just has a bunch of NBA dudes all over the place. They're not that good. What makes them great is their ability to value possessions and play defense and understand game plans, and everyone knows their role and everyone does their job on every possession. I mean, that's not sexy, but that's how you got to where you were. So this week it will be really interesting because, we just jumped right into Indiana, but it's not Indiana. They play Penn State first on Thursday at Chrysler. And,
Thursday night.
That's Penn State isn't that good, but Penn State did beat Virginia Tech. They've got some guys.
Penn State plays hard, and they have some guys. I thought one comment that Isaiah Livers made, I think it was Isaiah yesterday, he was talking about scouting and how in these games, guy that makes a three, all of a sudden he's a shooter, whereas in the Big Ten, you're scouting these teams to a level that is much more in-depth. And I don't know that there's that same level of game plan going into these games, and that was really an area where Michigan created an advantage against teams like Villanova, Providence, North Carolina. We talked a lot about how well prepared they were, how they would play off shooters and do all those sorts of things. That could be something where you're not really going into that same level of detail to play Binghamton, which could it's almost like playing a base defense the whole time rather than a well-oiled machine.
Right. And you're not only doing it, but you're doing it for a week. Because you know how John is. I'm sure they're spending, if you're playing a Saturday game, they're going to do individual stuff on Monday and Tuesday, blah, blah, blah. But, they're literally probably spending 3 days talking about Binghamton, where, look, I mean, this is why John is going to end up being in the Hall of Fame one day, is because he has that level of preparation. But to some guys now, that's got to get a little old.
As Jordan put it, the best part about playing more games is there's less practice.
Perfectly said. And I did ask John yesterday how he thought the team handled its start. In hindsight, how they handled this rapid ascent that really, people thought they were good, but no one kind of saw this. And he kind of tiptoed into it a little bit, saying, I'm trying to remember the exact answer, but it was basically they did okay, but there's no preparation for that. Like you can't coach a team into handling sudden success like that. And in hindsight, really, they probably handled it, even though they have played poorly recently. They probably handled it about as well as they could have. It's not like they
keep winning. You can't complain that
exactly.
much.
It's not like they went and won at Villanova and then split a pair in the tournament in Connecticut, right? Or lost at home to North Carolina. They
I would
have
say
handled it fairly well.
They got away with it in Evanston. That was the game where...
But they found a way.
They found a way, and they got out of there with a win, but that was where they... But the thing about that game is it didn't really wake them up. They didn't play particularly well in the next 4 games either. So
I would agree with that.
We'll see. They have a pretty favorable start to the new start to the Big Ten schedule. They have 3 home games out of 4 to open up, and the road game in there is at Illinois. So there's not really a lot of wake-up calls, but that Indiana game will be interesting for sure. Anything you want to talk about for the Penn State game?
Not particularly. I think it's a game where the team does kind of recalibrate things a little bit, and Ken Palm's got them winning by about 11. I think a double-digit win sounds about right to me. I'm always a proponent of Penn State because of their robust Philadelphia roster, typically, but I like some of their pieces. They're always a year away, so it's I think it's more the same in that game. I'm far more interested in talking about Indiana. I know you watch them really closely. That's your squad from your preseason pick. What do you think? I mean, it's a big ask for Indiana to come into a sold out Chrysler and get a win, but of the games, basically until Wisconsin, January 19th, I think this is really their only legit chance, barring something completely unforeseen. It's really their only chance for probably a loss, maybe until January 19th, which would get them out to, 17-0 or 18-0 or something like that?
Something like that. I think the Indiana's really fascinating to me because, one, they've been living extremely lucky. They won, I think, 4 games in a row, Northwestern, Penn State, Louisville, and Butler by a single possession.
They're the anti-Northwestern.
Yeah, and to be fair, you can't say they also got extremely unlucky at Arkansas. What's most interesting to me is how well they score inside. They don't really shoot the 3 at all, but they still manage to get a lot of their offense at the rim, which is generally hard to do. Usually you need some kind of spacing. So they're ranked 319th in percentage of shots from 3-point range. They don't really shoot the 3, but they're shooting 60% on 2s, which is the 3rd best in the country. And
a lot of that's Juwan Morgan, right?
They get 45% of their shot attempts at the rim, which is a stupid high number for a team that doesn't shoot the 3. And that's all comes down to basically Juwan Morgan and Romeo Langford, who both have just know how to score inside. Like Juwan Morgan's shooting 76% on 2s.
Yeah. As
a big guy, and he doesn't just catch and finish. He can score in the post. It's really just
he can drive and finish. Yeah.
Yeah, he can do everything. But guys that do those sorts of things don't shoot 76% on 2-pointers, especially when they're not really. It's not like there's a loaded team around him. It's not like Purdue last year where you have 4 shooters spaced around him. So it's really fascinating, and it'll be an interesting test for Michigan, I think, because they can play Morgan. He'll play a lot of minutes at the 5, and that's a tough ask for John Teskey because of his ability to spread the floor. So it could be another game where we really look to see how Isaiah Livers plays, because that was what Michigan needed against Binghamton, as Binghamton had a sort of 6'4" version of Juwan Morgan who could just block shots and finish, and that was tough for Teskey to kind of stay with on the perimeter.
With the Romeo matchup, what do you think about defending him? What's the best possible matchup in terms of trying to lock him down?
Charles Matthews. I mean, that's what Charles Matthews has really proven that he can do. I think he'll embrace that challenge, and I think he is more than capable of making him work for that offense.
And that goes back to what we were talking about with, like, when Michigan's at its best is when you've got these guys are taking personal challenges into every game, right? And they get this totally different demeanor about them as opposed to a guy they've never heard of from Air Force. You know, like that in terms of that level of play, that's kind of that's the hard thing to replicate for 40 games.
Yeah, and what I'll be interested to see is point guard's not really a strength for Indiana. Finney has been solid. Devontae Green can hit some shots, but they both have been somewhat turnover prone. And Xavier Simpson against the turnover prone point guard could also be an area where Michigan can kind of take Indiana out of its game.
Of Indiana's roster right now, coming out of non-conference play, right? So you got Morgan, you got Romeo, and I would imagine the number one question in Bloomington is for this team to compete for like a top 3 spot in the league. There's got to be a third. If you had to pick who that would be now, who would that be?
I don't have a pick. I mean, that's really it's a big 2 and everyone else. I don't know who you could really go with that's going to really everyone else is a complementary piece if you ask me. And that's okay. You have 2 guys who are going to be in the mix for all Big Ten. I mean, not many teams have that. I think the question is that I don't know that they have the guys that can shoot threes, but they don't shoot enough threes, and I wonder if that will create some issues in the Big Ten when teams are better scouted and you can really pack the paint and dare those shooters to beat you.
The most incredible stat to me about Indiana, especially considering how successful they've been, is that they don't have a player who's made more than 16 threes. At least when I was looking this morning, that was something that just kind of jumped off the page to me. That's a hard way to win in college basketball.
Yeah, but to shoot 60% on twos when you don't shoot threes is just ridiculous. Right. I mean,
so do you just pack it in?
Yeah, I think you have to try. Right. I think it's hard to stay in front of some of those guys, and they can create their own looks. But it's just a really interesting team, and it's hard to get very excited about them, considering I picked them to win the league in the preseason. Let's just say Indiana winning the league is not one of my bold predictions today.
Right.
So I think the turnovers could be a key against Michigan, though, because if Michigan can create those turnovers, that can help crack a pretty solid Indiana defense too.
Yeah. And before we move over to Michigan State and away from these Michigan matchups, I know you've got Ignas Brazdeikis versus Lamar Stevens kind of circled as one to watch this week. Is that your top matchup of the week, or are you looking at that Matthews-Langford duel?
I think the Matthews-Langford duel will be a bit more enticing. I'm just curious about that Penn State game where Lamar Stevens does everything for Penn State, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of the game against Villanova with Eric Pascal, and Brazdeikis did a really good job in that matchup. I would say his defense has probably fallen off a little bit over the last month.
Yeah.
And it'll be just interesting to see how he fares in one of those high-profile one-on-one matchups, because he'll mostly be the guy, I would think, especially with Mike Watkins back for I think he's still back, right?
Yeah.
They have a true center, so they're going to have to play.
It'll definitely have to be Brazdeikis on Stevens. Stevens in their 2 I think this is noteworthy. He shoots a lot. In their first Big Ten games this year, Stevens went 5 for 13 against Indiana and 9 for 24 against Maryland. That's just to kind of give people an idea. Like, there's a chance that it's just, if Iggy gets into his shooting mode where he's just trying to get up shots every time, those two might just be running back and forth, just going after each other. That could be some good stuff. But I'll talk on this later when we get into my predictions. But Brazdeikis, I feel like his best attribute is when the bigger the game, the bigger the moment, the bigger his performance. He's proven that as much. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Sliding over to Michigan State, interesting start for them for sure, with Northwestern at home and then a trip to Ohio State on Saturday. And can I just say I am pretty fired up for next weekend of going down to Columbus on Saturday for Michigan State, Ohio State, and then driving back Sunday for Michigan, Indiana on Sunday. After I feel like that's the reward for watching December. But
let's rewind for a second. So what do you make? Where's Michigan State at for you right now? They have handled December like people would probably want Michigan to handle December. They have sort of wiped away. They lost that game at Louisville, and now in December they have a good win at Florida, and they've just been blowing teams out. Where do you what's your stock rating for Michigan State right now?
I like Michigan State. I might be a little bit higher on them than most people, even though, they're ranked 8th in the country. But I think if you put maybe Michigan State in a different uniform, I don't know if they're ranked 8th in the country. I don't know if they're the highest ranked 2-loss team out there. But, I really think it's going to come together pretty nicely this year for this group. I think everyone really knows their job. Cassius Winston is getting better. I think he's just starting to kind of be the guy that I know that I've always expected or kind of seen coming, and I think you have too. The way that we've just talked about Winston's potential as an elite college point guard. I think he's getting there, and Langford is still a giant question mark, but the complementary pieces that they have, everyone really knows their job and everyone really does it well. A guy like Kenny Goins is a guy that at this level, when he does the job that he does every game, like, you're going to win when your sixth guy plays the way that he does night in and night out. Nick Ward is reliable, and he's doing everything that they ask. His attitude is good. He's working hard, and he's running the floor, and he's showing consistency. He's not picking up the dumb early fouls. He's staying within himself. I feel like Langford's probably, what is he? What is he going to be? And from day to day, this is the same conversation we've had time after time after time. But the last couple outings have just not been great, and now he's got a little ankle tweak from the second half in the Northern Illinois game that he missed the second half of that game. I don't know. If that's a lingering thing at all, like, at this point, I almost think he could use a game to sit and watch. It's not ideal to happen against Northwestern, but at least you're at home. But that's not me saying that I think he's out, by the way. There's been no indication of that. But, he went 1 for 6 on threes in the first half against Northern Illinois. He went 2 for 6 against Oakland, 1 for 4 against Green Bay, 1 for 3 against Florida. This is supposed to be your elite scorer. This is the guy who, after that Texas or the UCLA Texas games back to back, I thought, like, okay, here's the guy, right? He's going to be a all conference shooting guard. He's going to be, one of those guys who maybe flirts with, being one of the better shooting guards in the country and just an elite shooter. And then it just kind of vanished. So I don't know if he's being defended differently. I don't think it's that. I think he's just falling back into some bad habits and shot selection. And that's the big question. But to your overall point, I think Michigan State's one of the 2 best teams in the Big Ten. I like the overall direction that this team is going in. I think they're going to actually get a little bit better.
So those same December only splits for Bart Torvik's rankings. Michigan's at 45. Michigan State's at 3rd for December only.
There you go.
So no one's really had a better, well, I guess 2 teams, but really good December. And
that includes a win at Florida.
That doesn't, and Iowa.
Right, and Florida just beat Butler.
Iowa.
And Florida's not great, but as any big power conference road win is really impressive.
Yeah, that was a great win. And now they go into this week. with Northwestern and Penn State, with Northwestern and Ohio State. And what I found really interesting, I was pulling some stats about this, but Michigan State is ranked 10th in the country in transition offense points per game. The only notable teams ahead of them are Duke, North Carolina, Buffalo, and Gonzaga, which are all pretty much elite transition offenses. They have the volume. They're also 85th percentile in efficiency. I think this week is really interesting because I like to see what Michigan State is without its transition offense. When they can't get those extra points in a game, that's kind of been like the Michigan game plan against them in the past, right? That's the first thing you have to do if you're going to beat Michigan State. Ohio State and Northwestern are ranked second and third in the Big Ten in percentage of defensive possessions allowed in transition. So they're basically two of the three best teams in the league at taking those transition opportunities away. That will be really interesting. That's like the opposite of that Iowa game early this year, right? A team that's going to let you run up and down is just a terrible matchup for Michigan State. Whereas Northwestern and Ohio State seem like teams that can make things at least difficult for them and sort of see Michigan State tested in a way that we haven't seen this far.
Yeah, if you can stop the ball and you can, you make sure that you have a guy running with whoever's running, typically Nick Ward running at the rim. If you have someone that can stay on his back every time and understand how to identify trail man and on the wings, and when they go hunting for threes out there, and someone who can just get in front of Cassius Winston out when he gets a full head of steam, which is obviously very difficult. That's how you beat Michigan State, no doubt. Forcing them into half-court offense is your number one plan of attack if you're looking to stay in a game with them. Just speaking with Cassius Winston on Saturday, whenever that game was, just asked, or I think it was Sunday, I don't know, whatever, Saturday. I asked him, they put him at the 2 in a possession in the second half in that game and moved McQuaid over to the 1 and let Winston run off some ball screens. And while he didn't get the pass, he came off a screen wide open for a 3. And it would have been there if McQuaid threw it to him.
Was this after Langford was hurt?
Yes. So they're realizing that even speaking with, so Winston's all for that. Talking to Izzo about that same play, they're kind of getting at the point when him and Mike Garland especially, this has been a conversation, I think, is they got to get him more shots when you're in the half court. He is by far their best perimeter player. Your two best options in the half court is a Nick Ward layup or a Cassius Winston 3. However that happens is on the coaches and what they're drawing up. And I don't see why. You don't want to take the ball out of Winston's hands, but if you get locked into a half-court set, okay, you can audible there pretty early in a possession and maybe throw McQuaid out top and let Winston run off screens and hunt jumpers. I'd like to see more of it because this is one of the big questions of this team is how do they execute in the half-court when they are in that situation. That's a good answer. So would be curious to see if they add a little bit more of that in, or I don't know what they were doing behind closed doors in December, but say it this way. Northern Illinois wouldn't have been the game to show that in, right? Yeah, you can do it once or twice just to do it, but if they're actually thinking about doing it, you're not going to do it 10 times in that game and put it on film. So I'm really curious to see if this is actually a real thing, or if this is Izzo talking about playing zone defense, right?
The fact that Matt McQuaid has kind of developed into he can play off the ball, but he's also your backup point guard for all intents and purposes. You have that flexibility to just kind of switch that, and even if you have both those guys on the floor, McQuaid is capable of handling the ball and run Winston off some screens, down screens, whatever, to get him those looks, especially if Langford isn't hitting or you need some other option there. That makes a lot of sense. Get the guy who's a career 45% three-point shooter, more open shots. Can't really go wrong with that.
Yeah. Oh, and 48% over the last 2 years.
48%. It's 1.5 per shot. Good. That's pretty good. Pretty good. I saw you Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I saw you tweeting about the Ohio State game and a little bit of the inside matchup in that one.
Oh yeah,
I know you said you're excited to see that.
yeah. The when we were talking about matchups earlier for Michigan, if I had to circle one for this week for Michigan State, it'll be Nick Ward and Caleb Wesson probably beating the hell out of each other in that game in Columbus. They're two Ohio guys. They've gone at it before. They've known each other for a long time. They played against each other in high school. Last year, Wesson wasn't, I think he was very much getting in shape as a freshman. Now, I believe he's like an all-conference player on Ken Palm and has really come into his own, especially the last few weeks. He's been a beast. He's huge at 6'9", like 260 or whatever. But he's a big man, and Nick Ward's a big man, and that should be really interesting to watch.
And Ward struggled last year at
He always
Ohio
struggles
State.
against Ohio State. The year before that, he was even worse.
That I got to say that it's fun to watch them guard each other, but I'm also curious to see how they guard players not like them. We'll save that for a later podcast, but it's fascinating to see them start with that matchup head to head, banging against each other. When I think that Wesson has been basically almost just improved. They're really very similar players for all
Yeah.
See, there are two teams thrown in the post, and Wesson has just had some crazy games similar to Nick Ward, like 31 points on 10 of 12 shooting, and just beating up on some of these smaller teams. It'll be interesting to see that matchup and probably come down to who gets into foul trouble first.
So here's Nick Ward's career numbers against Ohio State. The first time they played, and now you have to remember, he didn't get an offer. Or did he get an offer?
I'm not sure.
I'm blanking. I don't think, I'll have to look that up. I don't want to say that. But so the first time he ever played against Ohio State, and he grew up very close. His father's a big Ohio State guy, even though he played, I think, at Tiffin, which is a Division II school in Ohio. But they grew up just outside Columbus. Ward went 3 for 7 in his first game against them with 9 points in a loss. Played fairly well. This is his freshman year. In his second game, went 5 for 10, 15 points in a win. The game that I was thinking of was as a sophomore when Michigan State had one loss. I think was ranked number 2 in the country. And Ward went 0 for 1, committed 3 fouls, 3 turnovers, and went 0 for 1 in a loss at Ohio State. Everyone probably remembers that game last year. So, yeah, he's had some ups and downs against them, but it's a big deal, I know, for him and his family when he plays down there. So it'll be kind of all eyes on him, I imagine, once again in Columbus.
That should be a fun one.
Do you have any thoughts on the Northwestern game before we move on?
I think that I just stick to that thoughts on the transition game, and if they can create that transition offense, I think that it's probably too big of an ask for Northwestern to sort of muck up the game enough to really compete in East Lansing. If that game was in Evanston, I might say they had a chance, but I have a hard time getting a read on Northwestern. They are basically slightly above average at everything, but not great at any one thing. Mm-hmm. I think that eventually Michigan State just pulls away in that one, but it might be close for a bit. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Northwestern, like I think you brought up earlier, that 3 of their losses were in the final minute or final possession or something like that. They got to win one of those games, I think, before you buy them being able to win anything resembling a game like this. So that's something down the line. It's not a team that anyone's going to want to play there, right? Because you're risking what on paper won't be a great loss, but it's going to be a hard game to win, as Michigan learned early on. Because the thing about Northwestern is if they could pull off, a win like this or a win, they have to play at Michigan in I think 10 days or so after this game. If they could pull off a game like that, or Indiana later in the month, or Wisconsin later in the month, the back half of the schedule, they could get to 10 wins in the league. And if you get to 10 wins in the league, I think you're going to put the selection committee in a tough spot. So
yeah, the start of their schedule is just brutal. They've already gone to Indiana. They go to Michigan State. They go to Michigan. They go to Wisconsin, and they go to Maryland all before February.
Yeah, and they have Indiana at home.
And Indiana at home. That's a brutal.
But now there are games against Illinois, Iowa, and Rutgers thrown in there. But right, I mean, I don't know what good a win at Rutgers is going to do after you get smacked, at Michigan or something like that.
And you're just gasping for air trying to keep your season afloat at that point.
Right.
You're more likely to get knocked off on a road upset.
Yeah,
that's tough.
They're 0-2 in the league already because they probably had the toughest draw of anyone in their 2 December games in the league, with the game at Indiana and Michigan at home. But anyway, all right, let's move on. Before we get into our bold Big Ten predictions, so before we started recording today, I just sent a text to a bunch of assistants across the league that I know from not only Michigan and Michigan State, but other schools, and it was just a very informal. I'm operating under the assumption that 14 to 15 wins, I think, is the number this year to win the league.
That's the Ken Palm number, so that sounds about right.
He has 14 or 15? What does he have a winner at?
Right now, Michigan's at 15-5. Michigan State's at 14-6.
So in Ken Palm's projections, it's 15 or 14 wins. That feels right to me. So I asked a bunch of assistants and got a few replies. Pretty much across the board from the 6 that I heard back from, it was 15 or 16. And with one guy saying it's definitely going to be 16. I don't know where he's pulling that from, but he was very, very confident. He said maybe 15. Another assistant replied that one team will figure out a way to go 9-1 at home and 6-4 on the road. So that would obviously be 15-5. So that to him felt about right. But it seems like across the league, 15, possibly 16 is seen as the magic number. I was curious where you would put that at, and what would it take to go beyond that? Like, is there any chance someone goes 17-3?
It's hard because we've never seen a 20-game schedule, so it's hard to kind of put the numbers immediately into context. I think that it's doable for a team to go undefeated at home, right? Like, I think Michigan, Michigan State probably have good odds to win every home game this year. So maybe you say, all right, you lose one, you go 9-1 at home. And then it comes down to how many games you can win on the road. And I think it really depends on if you're buying into sort of this middle tier of games. Like, how do you rate a road game at Iowa, Minnesota, Penn State? Like, these teams are good. Are they NCAA good? I don't see a Michigan or Michigan State. I know they're both in the top 5 on KenPom, but I don't see them as a team that goes 17-3 necessarily. So I tend to think that there will be a couple teams bunched up right around that 14-15 number, and I tend to see it leaning lower than higher. Where do you fall in on that scale?
I don't know. I mean, I see what you're saying with the middle tier games, but like having been at game, like I wouldn't want to play at Minnesota, not in any way. You know, like it's a great venue. They play well there. I've seen them take good Michigan teams. I've seen bad Minnesota teams take good Michigan teams to overtime. You know, in the barn. I think this year there are going to be more losses. I think that the bottom and middle of the league this year is, you know, outside of Rutgers and Illinois, is better than on average. So that combined with the extended schedule, I think it just brings that middle pack to being maybe closer to 500 than this spread out. Someone goes 17-3, someone has 16 wins, two teams have 14 wins, and then it's all kind of spread out. I think it's going to be bunched with the winner at 14 or 15 wins, and the worst team in the league. I see, Illinois will win 2 games and Rutgers will win 2 games. Everyone else, I feel like, will be, I can't see Penn State going 4-16 in the conference this year.
Yeah, right now on KenPom, the only teams projected to win fewer than 8 games are Rutgers and Illinois. So
projected to win fewer than 8.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's agreeing with what you're saying. You have basically you have 9 teams picked between 8 and 12 wins. And the question, I guess, is usually when you have one team emerge, like last year was weird where you had basically 3 teams within a game of each other.
Right, and they were all moot point because the league sucked. You had Nebraska won 13 wins and didn't even get in the tournament. So
2012 is when Ohio State, Michigan State, and Michigan all tied at the top.
Mm-hmm.
And that would probably be the closest to this, where everyone went 13-5, which is a pretty low number. Because even then, Wisconsin was 12-6. Like, that was a good year in the Big Ten. I don't know that it was. I don't know. I could easily see.
Well, that year they got 9 bids
in 2012.
Yeah.
So that's a similar.
Put it this way: Minnesota was a 6 seed and went 6-12.
No, they didn't get Minnesota. Those are NIT.
Those are NIT numbers. I'm sorry, my bad.
KenPom changing up his design and sending our podcast for a loop.
6 seed. They got 6 bids in the league. There were 6 teams with 10 or more wins. But I see your point. Do you think everyone's only talking about Michigan State? Do you think there's any kind of chance that this year could be, that an Ohio State or a Wisconsin or your beloved
Nebraska.
Hoosiers or Nebraska could jump up and make it a situation of 3 or 4 teams with 14 wins?
I think
I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility.
I don't, and especially when you consider how tough it is to win at Indiana and Nebraska. I think that having that and Wisconsin for that matter, those 3 teams are all going to be really good at home, and they're good enough to win most of their home games. And even Purdue's going to be a good team at home. Like, those are not easy road games to win. And then when it comes down to figuring out the schedule, you really got to look and say who's going where. Like, Michigan doesn't go to Nebraska, doesn't go to Purdue, and that is a benefit, I think, in this schedule. Because right now Michigan State has the second toughest conference strength of schedule remaining, according to Bart Torvik's site.
Mm-hmm.
Michigan has the 11th. So that is
who has the first?
Maryland.
Interesting.
Those numbers can be a little wonky because when you're one of the better teams, your strength of schedule is always going to skew to be less difficult, so the top teams don't have to play themselves. But it's worth noting nonetheless. So
I'm just going to put this out there right now. So Maryland has the easiest schedule after playing. They have the toughest schedule.
Yes. The easiest schedule remaining is Northwestern, which makes sense just because of how tough their first 2 games were.
Certainly. That's some poetic justice for Maryland with its ridiculous non-conference schedule. So,
yeah, right now Maryland is projected to play the toughest overall Big Ten schedule. Ohio State and Wisconsin have the 2 easiest, which adds some complication to that Big Ten race. I still think 15 is the safe number, and if I had to bet one side, I would take the under for conference wins.
I just looked at Maryland's schedule. They have Michigan twice, Michigan State twice, Ohio State twice, Nebraska twice, and Indiana once. That is brutal.
Now we know why they didn't play any road games.
It's brutal. All right. Okay, so yeah, 14 or 15 wins to me. I'll settle with 15 wins the league. What say you?
Give me under 15.
Under 15. Okay.
And I think it'll be a tie.
Yes, that we'll get into that in the predictions. Okay. All right. You just want to go back and forth on these? We'll just volley them?
Let's do it.
All right.
You start because this is your creation, this bold predictions.
This is my
We're getting into the hot takes here.
It's a podcast. What do you want me to do? Do long-form storytelling?
I wouldn't put it past you.
All right. My first prediction. This might stir up the Twitter mentions, but I will predict that Ignas Brazdeikis wins Big Ten Freshman of the Year over Romeo Langford. Your thoughts?
I would probably still take Romeo just on name recognition, but I don't think it's that crazy of a prediction. Brazdeikis has been putting up crazy numbers. Michigan is probably more likely to win more league games, and that usually seems to play a part when it comes down to the end of the season there. I think that he's had a little bit of an adjustment a couple weeks. He hasn't always been perfect, but he'll have a sort of terrible half, and then you'll look at the end of the game and he has 20 points and better than 50% shooting, and you wonder what exactly happened. Like, take the Binghamton game. He made 6 of 15 twos, and you're looking like, what is he doing? And then all of a sudden he's 21 points, 3 of 3 shooting from behind the arc, and it's another great game. He really knows how to stuff the box score, and that tends to pay dividends for this award season. I don't think I can see that happening.
So it's going to take two things, I think, for a guy like Romeo Langford to not win Freshman of the Year, and both I think are possible, and it's only because of what and who Brazdeikis is. So Langford obviously has the name recognition and all this stuff. The thing about Brazdeikis is, like, he will have that name recognition because every game he plays in, the way that people respond to him every single time, just talking to other writers who watch him for the first time and stuff like that, you know, he's kind of got a gravitational pull to him, where people will just become fascinated with the way he plays and the way he acts and all his little gestures and the shots that he takes and makes and blah, blah, blah. So, you know, I think he's going to have this villain thing going for him, where he's going to create a huge stir in the league. And, you know, Romeo Langford's awesome. Like, don't get me wrong. This is not a slight at him at all. He can get to the basket. He does just amazing stuff. I love his game. But if you look at the big-time performances so far this year, right, Brazdeikis goes for 23 at Northwestern, and they win the game. He puts up 24 against North Carolina. They win the game. He puts up 18 at Villanova. They win the game. 20 against Providence. He's big-time player. He takes big-time shots in big moments and makes them, and he wins games. Romeo Langford, while he's got some great numbers, you know, he had 13 points and 5 turnovers against Butler. He had 13 points on 3 for 15 shooting against Duke. 6 for 15 with 4 turnovers against Arkansas. And yes, he had great games against Marquette and Louisville, but, you know, you can't just ignore some of those other performances. So who does what in the games that matter in the Big Ten? If I had a bet on what I've seen so far, you can probably make a pretty good case that it's Brazdeikis. Maybe a little bit more so than Langford.
If Michigan wins the Big Ten, I think this is a lock.
Okay.
And I think they actually vote like a week before. So if it looks like Michigan's going to win the Big Ten, I think this is a lock.
All right.
I think, well, we'll see.
It would be an enormous upset.
It would have been before the season. Would it be now?
The Big Ten Freshman of the Year when he was a freshman in high school.
And Romeo Langford's still going to be drafted plenty high and make all his money. I just think that the way these conference awards, just like it could be anyone that isn't necessarily the highly touted, but they still put up better numbers and that could come around. And I think the conference results will decide this one, in my opinion.
I look forward to the Indiana fans coming at me either way. I love you guys.
Well, we'll get to see this matchup play itself out on Sunday.
Beautiful.
So give a little preview. My first bold prediction is that Purdue will miss the NCAA tournament.
Oof.
I I know they've played a tough schedule. I know they're really good at home still. I don't see it with their defense, and I don't see Carson Edwards doing enough to get them to that point. I mean, so they went 7-4 in non-conference play. What do they have to do to make the NCAA tournament in the Big Ten? They probably need to win 10, 11 games.
I think 10-11 gets them in.
Is 11 enough? Is 10 enough?
10's
So
enough.
a 500 team
Yes.
whose best non-conference win is at home over Belmont.
Yes.
That gets you in the tournament.
Yes.
We'll see.
We'll talk about it when we get into our bids, but yeah.
I think the one I really like, sort of they've been making some progress, I would say, and I think that win over Belmont is a sneaky, solid win. But their defense is just not good enough for me, and Carson Edwards can't do everything. But we'll see.
This would be their first time missing the tournament since 2013-14. That was that year they went 5-13 in the league. But Matt Painter's been to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 NCAA tournaments in 12 years. So there would definitely be a pretty significant development if this year's Purdue team, with a guy who started the year as a preseason player of the year candidate, if they missed out, that'd be rough. But, they came out of non-conference play without answering any of their major questions, right? That their major questions were who was going to develop as the other options, and what was this thing going to take shape as with replacing all these seniors and blah, blah, blah. And they just haven't. I don't think any obvious answers emerged in any spot.
Nothing. I don't see how that, what could change for Purdue that would make you a lot more confident in them to make a run in the Big Ten. Basically, you're just going to say Carson Edwards go crazy and our home court advantage is really good.
At this point, I don't know if it's about Carson Edwards going crazy. I think it's more about Carson Edwards having to figure out how to make everyone else better, which is probably a much harder ask. But you've got a guy like Travion Williams is kind of coming on. He's out of nowhere, played well in the last game, and he could be, a piece that steps up and suddenly gives them something. But I just don't see the scoring around them that you can rely on day in and day out other than Edwards. But, he basically, for them to avoid the NCAA tournament or missing the NCAA tournament, I think is the 5. I think Matt Painter mentioned it after the loss at Michigan, was that you still watch a Purdue game, and when you go through everything that Carson does, you want 5 or 6 possessions back, right? And so it's really unfair to put all of this on him, but that's the reality of it. Those 5 or 6 possessions that you want back after every game, he has to eliminate them. That's the only way I think that what these other guys do is going to be a residual of that. So you take some of those 6 possessions away, and maybe you win 2 extra games. That's probably the difference. Is it fair to say between 10-10 and 8-12? Looking at this group, that's really the only thing I could come up with.
Purdue's ranked 68th in adjusted defensive efficiency. Mm-hmm. The last time they were ranked that bad was that 2014 team that missed the tournament.
Yeah.
It all comes down to their defense, and they have too many guys who are just not good defenders. We'll see. What's your next bold prediction?
Do we want to get into bids?
Let's do it.
We'll go back to back. Okay, so we both have predictions on NCAA bids. Mine is that the league will more than double its NCAA bids from a year ago. Last year, 4. This year, I predict the Big Ten will get 9 in the NCAA tournament. So I have Michigan State, Michigan, Wisconsin, Indiana, Ohio State, Nebraska, Maryland. That's 7. Then from the group of Minnesota, Iowa, Northwestern, and Purdue, I'll say 2 of those get in. And here's why. So of those 7 that I mentioned, I put it at 14 or 15 wins get in, right? So that means those teams have losses somewhere on their schedule. If those 7 teams, they have to lose games, all right? The league did such a good job in the non-conference that it's going to inflate itself. And a team like Maryland that did nothing this year can go 10-10 and get in, because by going 10-10, you're going to have to beat, you're going to have to finish with about 5 wins over NCAA tournament teams in order to win 10 games in this league, just based on numbers. So I don't think it's going to be spread out. So by being bunched up, I think the league's only going to help itself. It's going to look like a genius for switching to the 20-game schedule. And, a Minnesota can sneak in, and Iowa can sneak in just based on the overall strength of the league and the fact that some teams have to win and some teams have to lose. So I think that'll do it. It's going to be extremely hard to win on the road this year. So, a team like Minnesota is going to get some wins over NCAA tournament teams. And that's just going to inflate the number. So that's kind of where I come down on that.
So I have Michigan, Michigan State, Wisconsin, Indiana, Ohio State, Nebraska. I think those 6 are locks. Let's call those locks.
Sure.
The next group, I'm not convinced that any of these teams are actually very good.
That doesn't make a difference.
I understand the math. But good, the math works. But gun to your head, if you had to bet your salary on one of those teams, one of the next teams making the NCAA tournament, which would you take? You can't even pick one.
It doesn't matter. 68 teams have to be in the NCAA tournament field, right? There's going to be 1, maybe 2 from the Pac-12, right? There's going to be 1 from the Atlantic 10, most likely. There's going to be some bid stealers here or there, whatever it may be. But the Big East isn't as good as usual. The ACC even isn't that great. Big 12 is okay. The Big 10 is going to have to be the league. It had the best non-conference performance. Some league is going to have to get an obscene amount of bids, and non-tournament teams are going to get in the field. It's going to be the Big 10.
Well, don't forget about the Pac-12 or the Big 12 though. Just about every Big 12 team could get in the tournament, except maybe Oklahoma State. I just feel icky trying to pick between Maryland, Minnesota, Iowa, and say that one of those teams is going to make the tournament, because I just don't trust them.
Lenardi's latest projections, the ones that came out on December 27th, he has Penn State under consideration. Penn State's under consideration, which means that as of today, all the other ones that we just talked about, they're in. He has the Big 10 getting 10 bids right now. He has 10
in, I know.
Yeah. Someone has to get into the field.
So does a Big 10 team with a losing conference record make the tournament this year?
I think it's possible for sure. I think if a team let's say Minnesota. It's 11-2 right now, which in any other year would be a big deal. Except right now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 Big Ten teams have double-digit wins right now, entering the second part of league play. If Minnesota goes 9-11, that means it's going to have to win. If it wins 9 games, it's going to have to steal a win over a Wisconsin, an Indiana, a Michigan, something like that. That'll be its marquee. It'll have 3 marquee wins. No particularly bad losses, right? That's the other thing.
What did Minnesota do in non-conference play?
It doesn't matter. Well, it doesn't matter. It's happened before. It'll happen again. I'm just saying. When it gets down to filling out the last 6 spots in the bracket, and a team like Minnesota doesn't have a bad loss on its record, because its worst loss is going to be Boston College on the road, and then a bunch of Big Ten losses.
What if we just send Northwestern, Iowa, Minnesota, and Penn State to Dayton?
Love it.
Straight from Chicago. From Chicago. Send them to Dayton and let them play it out.
Or you just take the best pieces off of every roster and make a team that could compete.
Will be key for differentiating between some of these teams for right or wrong.
I would say the league itself will figure things out.
that 8-9 game in the Big Ten tournament,
It could be a playing game.
that ends up as a playing game, depending on who's in it. We'll see. I get the math, and I get that the Big Ten has been good, but what if Michigan and Michigan State go 17-3? What if Wisconsin wins 14 games? What if all these other teams end up at 9-11? We'll see. It gets dicey.
I'll put it this way. I'll be stunned if someone goes 17-3.
We'll see.
Yeah.
I'll be.
So, wait, your prediction is how many?
I've got 6, and then I'll take 8. But I
You
wouldn't be
said
surprised
7 before the podcast. So, I think I might have yeah, right. Stick to your guns.
Well,
Dylan's
I
on the
took it off
record
my
with
list.
7.
7 teams. So I have to bet against Richard Pitino and Fran McCaffrey making the NCAA tournament. I'll take it.
Fair.
I'll take those odds.
You're taking 7. I'm taking 9. My next bold prediction is...
Hold on. You got to go back and forth.
I know.
Oh, you said
just
7
did
is
yours.
one of mine. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I will say the Big Ten Championship, speaking of, is determined in one way or another on March 9th in East Lansing. That, for those of you that might not know, is Michigan at Michigan State in the season finale in a game that has the chance. This was actually a topic of conversation on the text with some of the coaches this morning. That has a chance to be like an all-timer. If this league, if the things really play out, I think the way that a lot of us think with, Michigan and Michigan State both flirting with 15 league wins in one way or another, there's a chance that the Big Ten Championship is determined in the finale. And as someone who would love to see it, that'll be my bold prediction here, that it all comes down to that game. Because there's also the chance of, even if someone else jumps up, say Nebraska comes out of nowhere, they might be needing someone to lose that game in order for them to win, right? So even if it's not Michigan State, I think that game carries enough weight for one of those two teams that in some way or another, the championship is determined on the regular season finale.
So since you've been here, the regular season has been determined before the last game, I believe. I believe the last time it was determined on the last game was the Jordan Morgan missed tip against Indiana. Yeah. And then the year before that was the crazy day where Michigan won at Penn State and then Ohio State won at Michigan State, and it was a 3-way tie.
Yes.
I think those are the last 2 years where it came down to the final day, and they both had a lot of drama. Those also were probably 2 of the best Big Ten seasons in the last, the deepest Big Tens and most competitive at the top that we've really seen in a while. But I don't think there's been any others that came down to the final day. And that Indiana at Michigan game was fitting because that was a similar situation where the team that won the league was actually on the floor of the team that they, I guess, took it from.
Right.
That would have been a 4-way tie if Jordan Morgan made that tip in. Instead, Indiana won it outright. So that I could see this being a similar sort of a thing where everything kind of swings on that final day. I haven't looked at that game.
Well, it's going to be really brutal for Michigan because its last 4 games are Michigan State at home, Nebraska at home, at Maryland, at Michigan State.
Michigan also has a week leading into that game.
It does.
They have their bye game
Yeah.
is leading into that finale where Michigan State has to play Nebraska at home leading into that game.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
Which
Nebraska, meanwhile, will be earning its keep. Getting both of them? Not
on
cool.
the road back
What did
to
Tim
back.
Miles ever do to you?
Tim Miles has wanted to have his opportunities. He's got it. I mean,
you go.
They have not an easy schedule down there in Lincoln. I
know is I want to see them both at 14-5 walking onto the court at Breslin on March 9th. It would just be absolute chaos, and it would be pretty awesome.
It would be a fun one. All right. My next prediction, Jordan Poole becomes an all Big Ten player. I feel like right now he's sort of the forgotten guy. Everyone talks about Brazdakis, everything else. Quietly, he's averaging, he had really a poor first 3 games of the year. Since then, he's been averaging 16 points per game. He's shooting 50% from three. He's the most efficient off the dribble shooter in the country with at least 25 attempts. Michigan has some offensive warts to work around, and I think as they go into the year, the answer is just going to be more and more putting the ball in Jordan Poole's hands. So maybe he doesn't become a first-team All-Big Ten player, which was my original prediction, but I think at the end of the year we'll be looking around and say he might be the best player on Michigan.
Wow.
That's my hot take prediction. His efficiency numbers are through the roof. His usage is not quite breaking through to, I guess, that next level, but more and more we've seen Michigan's late game offense is just clear out and let Poole operate in a high ball screen, and I think that makes a lot of sense. Similar to Michigan State, you can't give a guy who shoots 50% from three enough shots.
Yes.
So Michigan doesn't have a dumb coaching staff. I think they're going to realize that and trust that, because some of the other guys who handle the ball on the team can't really shoot. So that's something to watch, in my opinion. Kind of reminds me of Karis LeVert in the 2014 season, where all of a sudden he just scores 15 points every night, and you're like, well, hold on, what's going on here? Whereas he might not be the focal point of everything.
Right. And it's pretty amazing because while everyone, remembers the shot against Houston and all of the hype around his close to the year and some of the big things he did, he actually did not score double digits in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. In Michigan's last 10 games of last season, he did not score in double figures. It's one of those things where you don't just snap your finger and suddenly you're the focal point of the offense and everything kind of just goes on beat. It's going to take a minute, and early in the year it was probably a little foolhardy for anyone to think that he was just going to step in and suddenly be the leading scorer and putting up 13 shots a game and getting buckets and running in ball screens and going to the hoop and doing all this stuff. Like, it's going to take a minute, and you're right. Now you're seeing it. It's starting to. He's more comfortable in the role. I think he kind of just knows when to shoot, when to go create for others, when it's time for him to get buckets. Against Binghamton, clearly he was just like, okay, well, no one else is going to score. Like, he put up a couple defended threes that, any other given time would be a bad shot, but he knew that they needed to score.
He plays defense this year.
Yeah.
That's what it comes. He played 39 minutes against Binghamton. He couldn't have played 39 minutes in a game last year without making 39 defensive mistakes. Yeah. I think that's the most shock. Like, I'm not surprised that he's scoring out of ball screens and making threes, deep threes, whatever. That's what he's done since he was 14. He's never played defense like this, and I was skeptical that he could be a guy who plays 35 minutes a night and can play that consistent level of defense, and he's really doing it. And I think that slowly it'll be interesting if he can keep that up in the Big Ten. He's just shooting the lights out, you could say, but he seems to do it every game.
Well, if he keeps this up in Big Ten play, then say goodbye, because you won't see him here next year. I can tell you that right now. Let's go to next fun fact or bold prediction. I will say that Rutgers, I know we agree on this one, Dylan, but Rutgers will not finish last in the Big Ten for the first time in its illustrious history since Mr. Delaney welcomed the Scarlet Knights with open arms into this historic league. Rutgers will finish 13th instead of 14th. So congrats to Rutgers for that momentous occasion. And Illinois, man, I don't know what to say. I was looking at it today, and Ken Pom has projections that have them losing 17 of their last 18, or being, favored to lose, or I guess favored to lose is not probably the right way of saying it, but 15 of their last 16 games, and I think that that's 100% possible. They're not good, and I feel like so many teams, the league schedule is going to be such a kick in the ass that for some of these teams, when they get Illinois, they're going to be looking to inflict some pain, because it's going to be tough sledding otherwise. So they rank 142nd in adjusted offense, 94th in adjusted defense. Really, I mean, the numbers around this team are just brutal. And for them, after the non-conference that they had, to go and lose to Florida Atlantic in overtime at home to finish non-league play, when you would think they're just desperate for a win, right? Because, in fairness, they did play a difficult non-conference. Their losses are Georgetown, Gonzaga, Iowa State, Xavier, Notre Dame, and Missouri. And that's including the two
Florida
losses
Atlantic
to Notre Dame and Nebraska and Ohio State. To then go and lose to Florida Atlantic is, that tells me everything. Put it this way, that tells me everything I need to know about this Illinois team. So, I'm thinking they finished 2-18, maybe something like that.
And make no mistake, this is
and they only play Rutgers once, by the way.
This pick isn't an endorsement of Rutgers. It's a whatever. It's a lack of any faith in Illinois. When Brad Underwood was hired, I was pretty high on the hire. I thought it would be a great fit. How do you fix this?
Well, I don't know, because I think the original sin was his first class that he brought in. When what they needed to do, I think, was bring in freshmen who were going to buy into the system, who fit into what he wants to do and the way that they want to play. Whereas because when he came in and to clean up a mess, you have leeway, right? Like, you have a couple years to develop guys, and you can lose games as long as there's something developing there. To bring in a guy like Mark Allstork and try to play him 35 minutes a game and run stuff through him, a guy who is a rental for a year when you're developing nothing. Like, they didn't need to win last year, so you don't need to bring in a grad transfer. Just bring in players, right? Bring in young guys, run your stuff, develop them so that in year 3 you can win some games because you'll have some experience and whatnot. And they didn't do that. And then you lose a guy like Mark Smith who transfers out, and even though he didn't play well last year, you can't lose him after you develop him, or at least have him in the system for a year. So I don't know if this ends well for anyone there.
Worst part,
I do like, and I'm gonna butcher Ao. I mean, he can play for sure, but I don't know what else you have going over there that is worth investing in.
The worst part is that you look at the other coaches who are hired at the same time, and Chris Holtman and Archie Miller are rocking and rolling, and that's just not pretty. It's not pretty in Champaign. All right,
this also was not the year for the schedule. If they would have scheduled in any kind of normal fashion, my God.
Well,
it's
they need
not
to
the year to
hire
go to Maui, right?
Whoever Maryland's director of ops is, and clean things up for next year.
But Maui's tough, because that's one of those, you can't withdraw. You can't not withdraw from Maui. That's just not, like, I know Georgetown pulls out of the PK80 and that wasn't a good look, but like, it would be a really, really bad look to withdraw from Maui. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
My next bold prediction is that Iowa will collapse again. I'm not buying it. I think this is the same terrible defense that we've seen before. They just got destroyed defensively in both Big Ten games. They beat Iowa State at home, but I think their New York little blip was more of a blip and more of an indictment of Oregon and UConn not being all that good. And I think this is a team that loses more than the 12 games that KenPom projects right now and finishes with the worst Big Ten defense again this year.
Interesting. Looking at their schedule, they start out at Purdue and Nebraska at home, so you can probably chalk up 2 losses out of the gates. But after that, the 3 of their next 4, they do have Northwestern and Penn State and Illinois bunched around an Ohio State game. And, if you can take care of take care of business in those games, suddenly they are off. They're 3-3 out of the gates in this latter part of the Big Ten schedule. So
hold on. They go at Purdue,
yeah,
Nebraska, at
yeah.
Northwestern,
yeah.
Ohio State, at Penn State,
and then Illinois at home.
You think they could end up? What are you saying the record is headed to Illinois?
I'm saying they have to split those 6 games.
They could be 0-7 with Illinois coming to town.
100%. I'm saying they have to go 3-3 in those games to do anything the rest of the year. Does that not make sense?
I think they'll be. Last year they started 1-7 in the Big Ten.
Mm-hmm.
I could see the exact same record.
I could
after
see
they beat
it. I'm
Illinois.
telling you what has to happen for them to have any chance of actually, doing something over the latter part of the year, not completely collapsing as what your prediction is. I'm not saying it's going to happen.
Here's the worst part for Iowa. Purdue, Nebraska, Northwestern, they're all going to desperately need those games.
True.
This is the kind of road game Nebraska needs to win. Purdue needs to win the home game like this. I mean, those are all. Northwestern's going to be fighting and clawing to get back up from some tough early conference games. I mean, that's not a fun start to the season. And then we've seen
Iowa is a team, by the way, that if it can figure out a way to go 9-11 in the league, guess what? They're going to the NCAA tournament.
I feel like Iowa under Fran McCaffrey is defined by long conference losing streaks, and I think we're looking at another one here.
Okay.
I'm not buying the defense.
I'm not saying you're wrong, but I don't think it's impossible for them to win 9 games in the next 18, right? And if they do that, they're going to the NCAA tournament without a doubt. Because they have non-conference wins over Oregon, UConn, Pittsburgh, and Iowa State. If they go 9-11, they'll finish 20-13. They're in, no doubt.
Mm.
So
I think I
think it's either that or a total collapse. We'll say nothing in between. We'll say they either finish
500 or
5-15,
3-17.
5-15 or 9-11. Okay, I'm going to focus on Wisconsin here with mine, and I'm going to say Wisconsin finishes the season ranked in the top 15, and that Ethan Happ finishes the year as Big Ten Player of the Year. Happ was my preseason pick of the year. I know they just lost to Western Kentucky. I think that game's kind of a wash. It's coming off of the holiday. You're on the road at a mid-major team that wants nothing more than to win the game. That was Western Kentucky's basically last relevant game of the year before embarking on Conference USA. So that was pretty much the Super Bowl in Bowling Green, and I'm not reading too much into it. I do like a lot of what Wisconsin can do, and we've seen seniors have monster performances in the second half of their senior year, right? Guys who've played a lot of games in their life, and Ethan Happ is pretty much the definition of that. I think he's going to be outstanding in conference play. I think he's going to carry them to a couple of wins that they shouldn't get otherwise. I know that their schedule is really difficult, including they got Michigan State back-to-back in mid-February, but it's I really think that they can go something like 13-7 or maybe even 14-6 to finish the league. They're starting off 2-0, so obviously off to a good start, but I don't know. I'll buy them, put it that way. Top 15 seed or top 15 in the AP poll at the end of the year, that means they're probably looking at a 3 or 4 seed, which would be a pretty big year for Greg Gard, and he needs it for sure.
I'm definitely buying Ethan Happ as Big Ten Player of the Year. Okay. I think that's a solid bet. I don't think you'd really surprise anyone there at that point. Carson Edwards has a lot of hype, but I just don't think they're going to win enough games there. I'm curious. I feel like they're sort of searching for that next guy. When they struggle, they're looking for Brad Davison to be that guy, but he's kind of struggled in big spots this year. Trice has been fantastic, and that gives you that 1-2 punch, but I want to see what Brad Davison looks like through the grind of the Big Ten season and see how that really works out. But I think they're definitely a top half team. And that could end up as a top 15 type of team. I think that they hand Michigan their first loss of the season, which will be in Madison coming up. So that could be a nice that would kind of vault them into that top 15 and sort of wipe away. The Western Kentucky game is just a scheduling loss. That's just a terrible situation, and I do think it points out Ethan Happ struggles against sort of the great athletic big man, and Charles Bassey is a dude, and he ran into him, and that's the one sort of matchup that can give Happ problems. I'm not sure there's that many of those guys in the Big Ten, and Happ kind of knows the Big Ten, right? You talk about scouting and everything. He
for sure
has been through this. He knows what teams are going to throw at him, and I think they're just a really battle-tested team.
Yeah, and I really think if you look at them game by game, Trice, for me at least, is the guy that you circle in terms of, when they run into big games. I think the question more often than not is going to be, what does Demetric Trice do? He was awesome in the Oklahoma win. He went 7 for 8 on threes. He was awesome in the NC State win. He went 4 for 5 on threes. He went 5 for 5 against Xavier. Those are their top moments of the year have all kind of revolved around his best performances. Whereas against Virginia, he scored 5 points, went 0 for 2. Marquette, 10 points, went 1 for 6 on threes. Western Kentucky, he went 1 for 6, scored 10 points. It really seems like in the bigger games, as he goes, they go. So that's probably oversimplifying things a little bit, but if Trice is a guy who really kind of finds a little bit of consistency, and I'm talking about a guy who's shooting 50% on threes, but if he finds consistency in their big games in league play, I think that might be the kind of the special sauce that gets them to maybe a next level. And just in terms of you talking about them getting that other, another star or another big time guy.
All right. My last take is that, well, I had two, but I'm going to go with Nebraska to make a run through the Big Ten tournament. I think Nebraska could win it. I felt good about this because I think they're actually a pretty good team. But I also look back, and Tim Miles has only won 3 Big Ten tournament games in 7 years. So that's not making me feel too great about my pick there.
But the odds are maybe in their favor at this point.
Yeah, someone has to win it other than Michigan this year, I think. And I think that Nebraska is a very solid team. And you watch them, and I like kind of what they do. I like their pieces. I think James Palmer is highly underrated. He should be in the talk for Big Ten Player of the Year, to be honest. So I like Nebraska. I don't think they have what it takes to win the regular season. So I said, why not pick them to win the Big Ten tournament?
I'm on board. With Nebraska. I think they look to me like a team that finishes third in the league and figures out a way to go to the Sweet 16 or something like that, right? Because they've got they've got high caliber players, Palmer, Copeland, Roby, Watson. Those are guys. They got real players.
Their starting five is great.
It's outstanding. So definitely a team where you say they make a run in the Big Ten tournament. I think there's a good chance it doesn't stop there. I think it's a team that I wouldn't want to play them in the NCAA tournament. I'll tell you that much.
The problem is that Tim Miles, I don't think, has ever won a NCAA tournament game either. Has he?
I don't know.
He's made the tournament twice, and they lost in the first round both times. So that's not great.
Right, but I mean, there has to be a first sometime for everything. Like, just because a guy hasn't done it doesn't mean does that mean right? Like, I would never say that like Matt Painter will never make a Final Four just because he's never done it. Obviously, that's a much bigger question than what we're talking about. But, yeah, I mean, the thing about coaching is that, not surprisingly, the guys with the most longevity are the guys who somehow accumulate certain things. Whether it be NCAA tournament appearances or wins here and there, you have to be around a while to get the opportunities to do them. And, Tim Miles has certainly done that. He's been a head coach in D1 since 2008. So, he's, if anything, overdue for a couple wins and a run in the league, or in the tournament. So I'm buying it. I like your projection there. The biggest question around Nebraska is, what level of contender are they for the actual regular season? Because that's what's ahead here, and I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. But
tier 2, in my opinion.
What was
next? Second tier.
Second tier.
I think they're right below
in that 12
top
and 8.
Group. Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, that sounds about right. I put it this way: you talked that some team could go 10-0 at home.
Nebraska. That's the thing.
Yeah,
their home court advantage is as good as any in the league, I'd say.
Definitely. I'm looking forward to going out there on January 17th for Michigan State, Nebraska. If that's a game, if Michigan State navigates its way through its first 4 league games and I think that would put them at 15-2 overall. They'd be ranked like 5th in the country. And if Nebraska can figure out a way to get there too, like that could be just a huge, huge early game. Nebraska would have to get through Maryland, Iowa, Penn State, Indiana to get there unscathed.
3 of those on the road.
At Indiana's brutal. At Maryland's not great. So that's probably pretty tough. But that could be. I remember talking about that Ohio State, Michigan State game, and like 4 weeks ago. That's coming up this weekend. As man, if everything works out, that's a huge game, and that worked out that way. And Nebraska, Michigan State could have the same thing. So, are we out of takes, or do you got anything else?
I'm
out
of
an hour and a half. Bro.
We've been going for a while. I
Holy
think people
shit.
are probably ready to
We'll
watch some actual hoops.
Okay. Well, this is our extravaganza. I mean, we were, in fairness, off for over a week of podcastless, basketball. So, if anyone actually made it through this,
kudos to you.
God
Subscribe, rate, review. Tell a friend.
All right. We'll let you go on that. Dylan, thanks for spending the time with me, and thanks to everyone out there for doing the same. I guess that's it. Be sure to tip your bartenders and servers, and Happy New Year.